Hi everyone, my name is Lauren Scholler. I'm one of the executive board members for Miles for Hips, and in this hip dysplasia experience interview, I am talking with Emma Howat. She is a 42-year-old teacher from Manchester, UK, and she first started experiencing hip pain around 8 years old. Before that, she led a very active life, taking part in high-impact sports, including running. And after several years of hospital and physical therapy appointments, she was finally diagnosed with mild hip dysplasia in both hips and no option for a PAO or a periacetabular osteotomy. 1 year ago, she had her left hip replaced, and it has improved her quality of life immensely. And a fun fact about her outside of her hip dysplasia journey is that she once did a bungee jump that was pretty impressive. We were talking about it just before the call. So thank you, Emma, for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'd like to start out by asking what has been your biggest challenge related to hip dysplasia?
Well, it's really just the everyday, to be honest. Like they're just getting up, going to work, and trying just to live your kind of normal life, with constant fatigue. I think the fatigue was the main thing that really impacted me a lot. I've got quite a demanding job. I'm a teacher. I'm on my feet all day, every day. So I did actually have to cut my hours down eventually, when the pain got really quite bad. And yeah, it's that really. It's like nothing kind of dramatic, to be honest. It was just the trying to just get up every day and do all of the tasks that you need to do, shopping, cooking for yourself, housework, that kind of stuff. And that, yeah, it was definitely the most challenging. I was tired a lot.
That is definitely a big challenge, and I think it's something that's not appreciated enough is that there are those physical symptoms of the hip dysplasia and the pain, but that also translates to major fatigue and, mental and emotional symptoms as well. Kind of going off of that, what do you wish others knew about hip dysplasia?
So yeah, I was thinking about this, and I think, I mean, I suppose part of it is that it can affect anybody, and I suppose that you can catch it early, and to be, I suppose, aware of that parents need to get their children's hips checked. I mean, I think I had my hips checked and it was missed. I think maybe because it was only mild hip dysplasia as well. So that's possibly why. Um, but I suppose what I really want people to know is that it can affect almost every aspect of a person's life, even when it is just mild hip dysplasia. So, I know there are plenty of people out there who have much more severe symptoms and many more difficulties than I've had. But the knock-on effects of having a hip instability can be felt in the whole body. So I think, and that's something that's, I suppose, that people won't realize either. They think hip pain, and people might have experienced hip pain at different times in their lives. But if it's chronic hip pain, it's not just the hips that it affects. So it can affect your feet, it can affect, your back, but really everywhere in the body. And that kind of pain just really can affect you day to day. And I think, it's one of those things a lot of people have said to me, like, oh, you wouldn't have known that you were in pain every day. Um, so yeah, it's that really as well. It's just you want people to know that you might be just getting on with things, but it's perhaps a bit harder for you than it is, for people who don't deal with hip pain.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And what are you hoping will improve with hip dysplasia diagnosis or care in the future?
Well, I can only speak from my experience in the UK, but what I would really like is for the kind of physio care that people get. So not even necessarily the diagnosis or the information that you get from doctors and surgeons. I'm thinking more along the lines of physios. So the kind of care that I got prior to surgery, I was sent to. I asked if I could have physio on the NHS. I know you have a different system over there in the US, but in the UK we have the NHS, and you can get physio treatment on the NHS. And I was sent to somebody who, gave me lots of advice, and I worked with her to try and alleviate some of the symptoms that I was feeling, but I felt that ultimately they didn't have enough specialist knowledge. And in the UK, I'd really like the NHS to educate their physios in more specialist areas so that they can send people to a hip specialist rather than a general physio. Because a lot of the things I was doing for, I suppose it was like a year, 2 years, was really not having any effect. And it was only when I found a specialist hip um, physio that things started to change for me, and it really made a difference. So, and I could say that even with the hospital that I had my surgery at, the physio that I had there, um, I wasn't actually given any physio after my surgery. I wasn't sent to a physio. I think I could have rung up and asked for physio sessions, but um, you were just kind of left really. I said, "Do I need to do some exercises when I leave the hospital?" And they said, "No, no, just learn to walk again." So, I was just really surprised with that. I thought I was going to be given very specific exercises to do. And I've got private physio who I work with, who I'll mention later. But yeah, there was no other advice that was given. So I think in the UK, that's one of the things that we really need to focus on.
I think it's interesting that you bring that up because in the last couple of months, Miles for Hips did a theme week where we interviewed members of the hip dysplasia team across the world. And I had the privilege of talking with a physical therapist in Australia, and he was saying how, they've really created this initiative where physical therapists are now very involved in identifying those missed patients with hip dysplasia. And so there is great communication between the physical therapists and the doctors if the physical therapists suspect and identify that a patient has untreated hip dysplasia. And throughout that series of videos, we talked with surgeons from across the world, and really the main goal of everyone is to have more of a standardized approach, both pre-diagnosis through treatment, through rehab and recovery, because
Yeah.
as of right now, that isn't very standardized. And as you were sharing, it is very different in pretty much everywhere in the world. You can go to a different country and it will be vastly different. So it's interesting that you mentioned that. And I think looking at the future of hip dysplasia, a goal that a lot of people are working towards is to standardize that, and so that you don't have as many missed cases, late diagnosed cases, but then also throughout the rehab and recovery, people have that support of physical therapists afterwards and that kind of thing. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for individuals with hip dysplasia or caregivers of hip dysplasia?
So I would say that one of the best things you can do is really research the condition. So I think the work that you're doing at Miles for Hips is amazing. That was one of the first places I went to try and find out about the condition. I read all of the stories that you published, and that was why I wrote my own story as well, because I was just desperate for information, and I just felt there really wasn't a lot out there. Um, and so it was making sure you research. And even now, I feel like I know quite a lot about it, but I'm still learning more and more all the time. And there's new research that's coming out. There's advice that I've been given from my surgeon, and then I've spoken to other people who've been given different advice. So it's making sure if you need a second opinion. I mean, I would recommend getting a second opinion anyway, even if you're quite happy with the advice that you've been given. It's always worth seeing what other healthcare professionals think, either different surgeons or different physios who've got opinions on these things. I've listened to loads of like podcasts and followed people on Instagram who are posting about hip issues. So um, that would be my advice. But the main thing is like not taking no for an answer. So you really have to advocate for yourself when if you're in pain and you're going to see a healthcare professional, and you feel like they're not listening to you or you're not being heard. It's really making sure that you are very clear with exactly what problems you are dealing with. And if you're not happy with the response, then go back, ask again. Um, Especially I suppose it's different places across the world. You might be paying for your care, so you might get a slightly different kind of service. But yeah, with the NHS, like initially, there were some messages given to me where I was told that, well, you just have to manage this condition, and there isn't a surgical option for you at the moment. Um, which eventually, I just had to keep pushing and saying, this isn't right. I don't, I think maybe I didn't present as somebody who was really struggling in the room. And yeah, I had to go back time and time again and say, this isn't working. I'm struggling to go to work every day. And yeah, then finally I got the answer that I wanted. So yeah, I think it's just about being clear. Like maybe not I'd not made it clear enough just how much I was struggling, and kind of perhaps I'd made out that, oh, I can get on with this, it'll be okay. And really, I needed to be a bit more forceful.
I think it can be hard to really be vulnerable about how much these conditions are impacting us in a doctor's office, and so I think that's something that a lot of other patients can relate to, and also that identity of being an advocate. I think many of us in our hip journeys can resonate with that, and just how much we do have to advocate for ourselves in those clinic spaces to get the care that we feel like we need. So I think that's a really important aspect of the hip dysplasia journey, and just not being afraid to um, advocate for yourself, get a second opinion. Miles for Hips has a resource on how to go about getting a second opinion because of how important that is. As you said, you don't even necessarily have to get a second opinion because you disagree with what a doctor or a medical professional said, but it's just great to get multiple perspectives and be as informed on what those different perspectives are for your own decision making.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'd like to end on more of a positive note that you alluded to earlier, but can you tell us about a positive interaction with your surgeon or another healthcare professional along your hip dysplasia journey?
Yeah, I actually have two, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
So yeah, the first one I wrote down was the surgeon who was the first doctor I saw who said that he would operate on my hip. So prior to that, I'd seen kind of two or three different doctors. Um, I think some of them, he was the first consultant that I saw. I think I'm not sure whether all of the other doctors I'd seen were also consultants, but I'd seen a number of different people who'd suggested that my hip dysplasia, because it was mild, and I did have mild arthritis in both hips. But I think what it was coming out as on the X-ray, it didn't seem to be so bad on the X-ray. But I was experiencing a lot of pain, and but I suppose when I was going into the doctor's surgery, I was also managing that pain by not doing too much. So I was actually at the point where I was actually thinking maybe I should just go for a run or something before I get to the surgery, so that I'm actually displaying the symptoms that I know that I have on a day-to-day basis. Um, because most of the time I would just not run, not walk. I do lots of strengthening exercises to make sure that I was like as pain free as possible. But yeah, this was the first doctor who really took me seriously. I did cry when I first went in, so that was, he was very sympathetic, and I just felt like he listened to me I felt like I was being listened to for the first time. And he said, I don't think anybody with these X-rays would really be thinking about operating on your hips, but he was willing to listen to me. He offered a um, what did I have? One of those injections first, like a steroid injection, so that he could see where the pain was coming from. And then by the time I went back, he said, we've done everything that we can. Like the next step is surgery. So yeah, I was so happy to have found that doctor, and it was Mr. DeVecchio. He's called. He's at Wrightington, um, which is the Wrightington Hospital, which is like the hip specialist place in the northwest of England. So yeah, so that was the first one. And the second one is Laura, who runs Help for Hip Dysplasia, and that's on. You can catch her on Instagram. So I found Laura's page, and I'm a member of the Patreon, and I've been working with her for years now, trying to manage the pain levels. Pre-surgery, and a long time leading up to that as well. So I really did get to a good place with it where I was almost pain free for a few months. I suppose about 6 months before I had surgery, but that was because I wasn't doing a lot of walking and I was just doing the strengthening. So, but yeah, by the time it came to the operation, she did lots of prehab with me, and then she was the one that gave me the rehab advice afterwards. So yeah, and we just did a walk together actually up a steep hill for the very first time. So yeah, she like helped to guide me through that and stuff. So that was great. So yeah, both really positive experiences for me.
That is great. I think with the first interaction that you described, just can be so impactful to have a doctor who finally listens to you and perhaps sees past some of those assumptions that can be initially made about us when we're presenting to an appointment. And, like you said, some of the doctor that I had for my hip care, he saw the ways that I had to modify my day-to-day life around my hip symptoms. And I was no longer participating in the activities that were most meaningful to me, like running, that was important to me. And he considered my goals and the activities that I valued in my day-to-day life. And he noticed that my hip symptoms were impacting those. And so
Mm.
that's when we decided to talk about treatment options. But I think if you providers don't necessarily see that aspect of it, and perhaps if you go into the clinic on a day when your pain is relatively low, but they're not considering that it's low because you're not doing the activities that are meaningful to you,
Yeah.
I think that can be challenging. And again, that's a space where you tend to become an advocate for yourself to say, well, I might not be in a lot of pain right now, but that's because I'm not doing anything that I really want to be doing or anything that I feel like I could be doing if this was managed appropriately. So,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
yeah, I think that thank you for sharing that and also about Laura as well, just the importance of having that structured physical therapy and physical therapy support before and after is so crucial. And so I'm glad you're able to find that in her.
Yeah, she's been such an amazing help for me. Yeah, it's been great to find, I know there's quite a few other kind of physios online who like specialists in hip care. And it makes such a difference when somebody knows about hips. I think even for people without hip dysplasia, if they've but if they've got arthritis in the hips, or other hip conditions, there's so much that you can do pre-surgery. And to be fair, even if I had not been allowed to have the surgery, I would have been able to manage the condition still, so that I wasn't in pain so much every day. And that can, because some people might not want surgery, so the option to actually manage it conservatively is really, really, really important. Um, yeah, and I'm a big kind of advocate for that. Definitely is lots of prehab and rehab.
Absolutely. I will make sure that your story with Miles for Hips I know that you updated it recently to share a little bit more about what things have looked like most recently for you. I will make sure that we share that with the link to this video on YouTube. And anyone else who's listening, if you go to the Miles for Hips page, you can read about Emma's story there as well. And thank you so much for sharing your experience here. This has been really insightful, and I think a lot of people can learn from this.
Oh, thanks for having me on. Yeah, I just hope that if somebody's struggling with it, then the advice might help them. It's good to be able to help other people with it because it can be so difficult when you're in the middle of it. So
Yes, it can. And I think it shows that nobody's alone in this. There's a community of people who are here to support at any part of your hip journey. So thank you again, Emma.
thank you.